Welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs.
So welcome back to the Your Family Dog podcast. I'm Tina Spring, and I'm joined today by the fantastic Julie Fudge Smith. And for today's episode, we thought we would talk about the evolution of the dog and how this amazing relationship that humans have with our canine companions began and what the research shows us. So as is typical, I know nothing about what we're talking about. I'm just kidding. And I'm going to let Julie start.
Okay, that makes me the default expert. This is really bad news. But what I would say is that for those of you who are new listeners, if you go back, I don't know, a decade, because we've been doing this since 2016, and I think it was in 2016, 2017, I did an interview with a woman about the origin of the dog. And most scientists will say that the dog originated or evolved from the wolf to the dog. And it could happen very early on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about timelines in a second. But this woman had a really interesting theory that it actually went the other way, that wolves evolved from dogs. So that was kind of interesting to talk to her about that. So I would go back and check out that episode. We'll make sure there's a link to it in the show notes, and as well as the name of the book, which I can't find, of course. I have been looking frantically for my book, but I can't find it. Anyway, one of the things that's really interesting about dogs is there's lots of different ways that you can take a look at whether and when dogs became domesticated. Most scientists, and I would say probably the vast majority of scientists, agree that the very first domesticated animal was the dog, and that it happened well before we domesticated other animals. I mean, and if you can think about it, cats are not considered to be fully domesticated, but there are different kinds of evidence for the domestication of dogs. One of the really interesting ones is archaeological evidence. And there's archaeological evidence in China, in southern China, I believe, that dates back somewhere around maybe 20,000 years of dogs, burials of dogs that are different than the trash heap of the animals of other bones. What's also very interesting is that although there's definite distinction in the burial of dogs, there does seem to be some striation on the bones to indicate that these dogs might have been a source of food. The next most recent one, and I have to say I've not reviewed my notes on this, so this is all by memory, is I believe it's in Scandinavia, and it dates to somewhere around 15,000 years ago, where there's very distinctive burials that the dogs are buried, oftentimes either with a person, close to a person, and sometimes with a toy or some other special object. And that dates to about 15,000 years ago. And those dogs, no place else, when there are burials of dogs, are there any striations on the bones, indicating that China seems to be the only place where they were used as a food source, because you can tell by the way in which the bones have been hacked. So what's also interesting is that dogs have appeared on there's the Pharaoh dog and the Dalmatian, I believe, have appeared in hieroglyphics in ancient Egyptian tombs. There's cave paintings that include dogs, and it seems to be genetically sound that dogs seem to have separated from wolves a pretty long time ago. And why is it that they were able to be domesticated? Why is it that they joined the human group? There's a couple of interesting theories. First of all, there's also, although this, I'm just going to throw this out there, although I'm sure all my good scientists and probably my good friend Mike Morales will call me off on this one, but there is mitochondrial DNA. Now, there's our DNA that sort of makes up who we are, but the mitochondria is very old, and the DNA within the mitochondria comes from the female. And it seems to be there's some indications that the mitochondrial DNA of the dog goes back like 120,000 years ago. And it could be, there are some theories that the dog was very early domesticated in Africa and may have come out of Africa with early humans to settle in Europe and move into Asia. So there's some evidence that dogs might have sort of co-evolved with humans after from prehistoric times. But what we do know is that dogs have a social system that's very similar to humans. Tina and I were talking about this before we were trying to decide what to talk about today. We were talking about the social units of dogs. And one of the theories that why dogs were so able to be successfully domesticated is because their family units are very similar to the human family units. There's usually a mother, a father, there's siblings, there could be aunts and uncles that all hang around in the family group. They are very affectionate in towards one another. They as we know, our dogs lean into us, and our dogs lick us, and our dogs like to sleep with us, and our dogs will, like Zuzu, I know when Zuzu's like, Mom, you can't go. You've been going away too much because I'm going to lay on your feet now, so you can't go anywhere. And so I think that so many of the interactions that dogs have and their ability to read human faces, their ability to read the expressions of others and to sort of mimic human expressions makes them a really great candidate for domestication. Another theory is that they hung around human camps, and very early on, humans would not only would they have garbage heaps, but they'd also have bathroom areas. And the dogs would clean up not only the garbage, but the human refuse as well. And so what they found in theory is that there was a reduction in flies and diseases and other things because these dogs help keep the human abode, the human habitat, cleaner. And so that was a way in which they sort of endeared themselves to humans. And then, as we know, they are just extraordinarily affectionate and intelligent individuals. So there's lots of ways in which I think dogs could have ingratiated themselves and certainly to have become the first domesticated animal. So, Tina, there's my summary of canine domestication. I guess we're done.
Well, and it's interesting to me that it's always been this assumption that dogs came from wolves, right? The Canis group is really a pretty decent sized group. It includes jackals, it includes coyotes, it includes, I thought it included foxes too. The Ethiopian wolf,
they're
the
very
red
closely
wolf.
related. I know that.
So I had heard at one point, and I wish I remembered when, I don't, that there was some curiosity about whether dogs could have evolved or dog-like creatures could have evolved from more than just the wolf, right? That some breed or breed groups came maybe more from foxes, which foxes are interesting. I always think of them as somewhere between dogs and cats. Like they're kind of they seem to have some attributes of each. I usually just tell people that dogs became domesticated because they figured out we were messy eaters.
That's probably as good a theory as the rest of them that we.
And that in many cases we throw away the best parts
Oh
from a
yeah,
dog's
yeah,
perspective.
yeah. I think I would not be surprised if dogs were not influenced by a wide variety of genomes. They may have evolved from wolves, but that doesn't. But it's interesting because I was just reading an article the other day about the definition of species. And for most scientists, they cling to the idea that a species means that these are a group of individuals that can successfully breed with one another, right? But
Well, that's right. Like I was talking to someone who is a physical therapist, and she was talking about that she like some of her kind of mind space as far as what goals should be as far as being ideal is, for example, she thinks about taking supplements that are approved for women who are pregnant. That if it's safe for women who are pregnant, then it's probably safe for just about, like if it's been approved, it's probably safe for just about everybody. Now there's kind of a star next to that, that not everything is tested on pregnant women, right? Because the stakes are pretty high. And then she also talked about like, watch a baby breathe. If we're not breathing the way a baby breathes, there's some sort of restriction or problem somewhere. I thought this was like a really simple, I mean, maybe it's Pollyannish, but a very simple way to think in terms of what is ideal versus what's normal.
Right.
So I
Well,
wonder that in dogs too, right? Like they're not all they don't behave like wolves. For example, some differences that I've learned over the years reading lots and lots of books on the subject is that, for example, wolves don't follow a finger point the way dogs do. That they stare at the end of the finger. Now, I will say, I meet dogs all the time that when you point, they look at the end of your finger. I'm like, you're a tiny wolf. The little Shih Tzu we were working with earlier today was positive that the end of my finger was the point of the story. So that was one thing, the finger point thing, and that wolves don't really ever give up. If they can smell the food source, they just keep working at it. Where dogs are like, okay, I need someone with thumbs. We need to call management. So um, there's definitely behavioral differences, right? A wolf raised in your home is suddenly not a wolf. It is still a wolf.
it is still a wolf. And the wolf dog hybrids are those are very unpredictable individuals, if you ask me, and not something that most people should have in their home, and in fact can be a source of great difficulty. Um, what I was going to say is that it seems to me, because dogs are so universal. I mean, there's so many different kinds of dogs around the world. And one of the things that this, I wish I could find my book and remember the name of this woman, but anyway, she looks a lot at primitive dogs, or dogs that are not have not had as much of a domestic influence. Like she looked at the Papua New Guinea singing dog and a variety of others to get more of an idea of what the proto dog was like. And I would agree with you that I think that dogs have been there's been other species before, because one of the things I was going to say is I was reading this article about species, and in general that's probably not a bad working definition, but there are also exceptions. I mean, you can breed apparently lions and tigers and produce a liger. And so what is the species? So if you can have viable offspring between species as diverse as lions and tigers, then there's no reason to think that there's not some kind of genetic um, influence from other species, and that early on, dogs, perhaps as they evolved from wolves, or as wolves evolved from them, that there were other species evolving at the same time, and that depending on where you were located geographically, there's going to be a different group of individuals contributing to the genome of that particular group. And so you may have an underlying basic DNA, but you're going to have a lot of differences based on where it was that this particular species of dogs evolved, and who was there that might be able to contribute to the DNA, the genome of that particular dog. So I think, and I don't know today if dogs can breed successfully. I know they can breed successfully with wolves. Can they breed successfully with other species of
They
canines?
can with coyotes.
That's true. They can with coyotes. Um, can they with jackals? Can they? I don't know. I have no idea how genetically fluid this is.
Well, here, you talk and I'll look it up on Google.
Okay. Um, so one of the things that people say, well, why does it matter where the dog came from or how long they've been domesticated? Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. You're gonna have either you're gonna bond with your Shih Tzu or you're not, right? But I think it's really interesting for us to understand. In some ways, it gives us a much deeper understanding of how dogs communicate with us when we understand how long the relationship has existed between us. And I try to encourage people to see that this relationship with dogs is based on thousands of years of interactions, and that we know one another better than we may think that we do. And so it's so interesting to see what dogs can do that even like really smart monkeys can't. Like there was I think was it in Hungary or was it in Sweden? They did an experiment with a bunch of dogs, and they found that dogs will mimic what you do. So if you look at your dog and you spin around, your dog will look at you and spin around. In fact, we did that they will mimic different motions, sometimes with or without a cue. And so I remember when Emma and I read about this, and we still had Hudson, our golden retriever. So she stood in front of Hudson and she said, "Hudson, watch." And she turned around, and Hudson kind of looked at her, and he spun exactly the same way that she had done. Or like, as you said, you can point, and the dogs don't, I mean, other species just look at your hand, the movement in your hand. Dogs will look, oh, I'm supposed to go over there. And that kind of thing, I think, happens because of millennia of growing up together, that we have formed a basis of communication that has been in place and has been worked on for so many thousands of years. And I think about also too, if you look at other species, I mean, pretty much all red foxes look like all red foxes. There's a certain look, but that's not what happens with domesticated animals. You look at the variety of species of, or, breeds of dogs that we have, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes, that is a direct result of domestication, because people will breed for particular characteristics and push a dog in that direction. What's interesting is you can't push everything, and that there are always consequences of pushing genetics too far. And I think we've talked a little bit about that. Like if you look at pictures of collies from the turn of the last century, they have much shorter noses and broader heads. And what there was a push for, it was just sort of what is one, I think Sue Sternberg calls them needle nose collies. They have these long pointy noses now. Well, what happens when you breed in that direction? You compress the skull. So they have smaller skulls, longer snouts. Is that going to have a consequence? It could. I mean, maybe these dogs are not as bright as they used to be because their brains are compressed more. It could be it affects their sense. I mean, think with brachiocephalic dogs, the push towards those short snouts causes all kinds of respiratory issues for dogs. So while we can push for differences in dogs,
And my guess is that it broadens the skull. So if we think
yes.
about the breeds that have short noses, their skulls are wider.
Right. So now is their brain sloshing around more? Are they more prone to concussions? Who knows?
Maybe it's bigger.
Maybe.
I mean, I know that research shows that something as simple as an individual human mouth breathing more than they nose breathe will change the shape of our skull and face and impacts all manner of behavior and health. So yeah, breeding for specific characteristics will very likely change other attributes of the animal. So I know in the fox domestication, experiments, they resulted with floppy-eared spotted foxes that wag their tails in greetings to people, and their behavior stayed relatively juvenile. They never really exhibited adult fox behavior.
Yeah, and basically what they produced was a small brown dog, because what they bred simply for behavior. They bred for dogs, or for foxes, that were much more friendly and interacted with people. And it's a pretty famous. It was in Russia. And what they found is that it changes color. You breed for a characteristic, and basically they ended up with a small brown dog. Is what they got.
With floppy ears and spots.
Yes. One of the other things we have found is that And Mike Morales talked about this a little bit when he was on with us about the idea of you change the gene, how it's expressed, where it's expressed in the body. It could be, if it's expressed in the body, it could be, heart muscle at one point, but the same gene expressed could also influence hair color or whatever. And he was saying, there's not just one gene for height in human, there's something like 6 or 16. So that when you start pushing for one behavior or one look, what's the expression of that gene in the other parts of the body, and how is that going to be influenced? And one of the things we have found, at least what I was reading, this was several years ago, so if I'm wrong, please correct me, but the more we push towards what's sort of albinoism, like towards the light color, instead of taking a golden retriever, we now have these white retrievers. And when you push color, oftentimes what happens is that you also push towards some of the problems that develop with albinoism, but it also tends to come out as personality problems as well, that they tend to be more aggressive if you have the lighter color, the way you push that. And so you have to understand.
I'll just tell you, like, anecdotally in my practice, golden retrievers, in my experience, on either end of the continuum, the really, really, really red ones, or the really, 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 really light, what here is referred to as an English cream. Both of those extremes, the red ones, in my experience, and of course there is huge deviation in this. Like, I am speaking stereotypically, and I own that. There are outliers. I'm not saying that, I've exhaustively researched and have this peer reviewed, but in my experience, limited as it is, that the really, really red ones are very high drive and can be difficult to live with, especially for the average family who had an old retired golden retriever and now have a bright red golden retriever puppy because they chose for color sometimes. Often those tend to be, in my experience, more working lines. And then the English creams, I see a ton of fear and anxiety. I also
and
see
then
that
fear and anxiety can be expressed as aggression.
And a longer coat length.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, I think that when you push for color, you're going to change underlying behaviors or personality. You can't help but do it because those genes can be exhibited in different areas of the body.
Well, and I would absolutely say, like, the different colors of Dalmatian or Doberman absolutely is different temperaments. Breeds that have multiple coat types, for example, Dachshunds that have a smooth, a wire, and long coated. I will tell you the long coats have more of a spaniel temperament than the wires, which have more of a terrier temperament. So long-haired Chihuahuas, very different temperament than short-coated Chihuahuas. So yes, those genetics for coat length or coat color absolutely are going to carry other genetic side effects that go with them.
Well, I think about it in Labradors as well. There is a difference between yellow labs, black labs, and chocolate labs that I have found. What?
I'm going to make all the chocolate lab people mad. Meth labs?
Yes.
And the silvers. So here, a big thing is the silvers. And one of the things, and I see huge fear and aggression. Their coats are very wiry. And the dogs do not appear to be very stable. I think I know, like, one of the 10 I've worked with so far is pretty stable.
See,
but a lot of them are not.
That's just really sad as far as I'm concerned. It's the same kind of thing is that what, and this is only my personal experience over the years I've been training. I've seen a deterioration in German Shepherd behavior as well. That with the emphasis towards that slanted back rather than a straight back, any of the ones I've seen with the slanted back, we have some real serious behavior problems. I've seen in 20 years I was training, there was one couple that came in and it was a wonderful dog. It was a German Shepherd, but it had a beautiful straight back. And it was just a delightful dog. And it was one of the very few German Shepherds over the years that I actually really enjoyed training because so many of the other ones had such serious behavior problems. And I can't help but wonder if you're trying to why slope the back like that? I don't understand.
They
And
want a
two,
flying gait.
it just is it painful for the dog? That's the other
I don't
thing.
know.
I don't know, but I know that behaviorally they were. I'm sorry that they were just iffy for
I
most of
mean,
it.
I don't, I mean, so again, we're speaking a little bit about stereotypes. I'll give you a stereotype buster. When I was working on testing my personal dogs back in the day about who was best at scent work, it was the pug. The pug
The
absolutely
pug.
picked up, yep, the pug picked up scent work fastest. He also was very, very hot weather tolerant. His nares were wonderful. He was very heat tolerant. You'd be like, come on, I want you to go in the house. And he's like, I'm totally fine. So a lot of the things that the behaviors that people will kind of stereotypically grouse about, soft palate issues and all that. Well, my one example of the breed didn't have any of that. It didn't impact him that way.
Well, lucky you. Lucky
Yes.
him. So what does this have to do with the origin of the dog? Well, I think that it does in the idea that you can't help but have changes. I mean, I think about I think about labs and like there's if you're going to get a lab, you want to there's field labs and then there are house labs. And I think that if you really want a house pet, do not get a lab from a field line. And I think that although genetically they're the same or they're the same, they're
Oh,
not.
but behaviorally they're very
They're very,
different.
very different. And there's a
We have one that finally she's coming right up on 2, and she's finally starting to be easier
is
because
she a field
she has
lab?
been yeah, she's a field bred lab. She's very, very high drive, and she was tough, and they are very dedicated family dog owners, but this dog was giving them fits
Yeah.
because
Well,
her drives are so high.
yeah, and then the problem with the house labs is that there's a full 40% of labs who don't know how to retrieve, which is just hysterical to me. But the other thing is that you do is that now you've developed this lazy lab. I think with that has also come just this food obsession. Have you noticed that in labs, a real food obsession over the last
Well,
few
I
years?
believe they found a genetic link for Labrador Retriever. Let me look it up. I'll look it up while we're talking. But I believe that they found a genetic link in labs that they're missing, like the ability to satiate. A
Huh.
genetic mutation in the POMC gene that makes them likely to be overweight and obese. This mutation is associated with increased food motivation and fat storage.
That's interesting. It's almost like um the thing that I find really interesting is the effect of environment on genetics. That
And that was found at Cambridge.
okay, because I was reading another article a while back about, or it was maybe I was watching I don't know, I think it was I watching a podcast or a TED Talk. That was it, and they were talking about genetic environmental influences and. In Denmark, at the end of World War II, there were severe food shortages in Denmark. And if you were pregnant and not getting enough nutrition, what they have found is those babies that were born after that year of almost starvation, those children grew up to be they tended to be a little bit chunkier because their bodies were programmed to store food. because we had been starving. And so therefore, when we have food, we hang on to it because who knows when the next starvation period is going to come. And so I was wondering is if with these labs, if I don't know what kind of an environmental trigger might have happened, or it sounds like a genetic mutation, but environment can cause the same kind of thing, can cause a behavior that seems to be maladaptive. But if you look at the environment within which these dogs or these people developed, it's not maladaptive at all. And so, and that's a genetic disorder, but it just reminded me of what happened in Denmark in World War II.
Well,
And
and
the
this
fact that,
POMC mutation that's in it's in flat coats and in Labrador retrievers. It um it's a double whammy because one, they have a higher food drive, but two, this mutation causes them to use around 25% less energy when at rest than dogs who don't have this genetic mutation.
so that inclines them towards obesity because
Right.
their metabolic rate is so much lower. Are you sure it doesn't happen in clumbers? Because I swear to
They,
everything that's
according
holy.
to this software, this article, it's
You
it's
you just
flatties.
described Clementine, not Zuzu. But
You named her a round orange fruit.
well, no, we named her for Clementine Churchill, Winston Churchill's
Oh,
wife. Um, but um,
maybe
but
she didn't get the
she
message.
does, by the way, love clementines. So she will eat clementines. Zuzu could take or leave them, but
Well, because
they're
Zuzu
clementine.
knows that Clement dogs aren't supposed to like citrus.
Yeah, well, somebody forgot to tell Clementine that you don't really have to be on the search for food 24/7, by the way. So anyway, but she's funny. We love her.
Just a killjoy.
Yes. Yes, I guess I am. But
Just ask her.
yes, and my dinners are like way too small. I'm just saying that,
Right.
that,
You should start it now.
yeah. And I will tell you, if I don't eat by like 5:45, I'm wasting away. You can just watch the fat melt off of me as I waste away
She
from
would
getting my
she would
dinner.
so struggle at our house because we're just kind of like, we'll feed you when we feed you. Like there's not really a major schedule. It's like you'll get fed twice a day. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I used to be like that too, but then they became, I don't know, they've gotten more insistent and and the problem is I love my husband, but it's like, just feed him. It's like, well, I'd like to, anyway. Yes, I used to be more flexible than I am now, but and there's
Well,
about,
now there's an episode. How managing our dogs changed at retirement age.
yes.
Right?
So,
It's a similar change to what happens when we suddenly have kids in the house too, right? Like
yeah.
lots of changes for our four-footed companions about all the things that change and adjust. For example, when my dad retired, this has nothing to do with the evolution of dogs. Maybe it has to do with the evolution of man. But when my dad retired, there was one dog at my mom's house that she stopped feeding
Oh, because your
because
dad was,
my dad gave Mackenzie so much off the plate that, and she was healthy, right? Mom was careful about what she fed dad, so made sure it was approved for the dog. But yeah, stopped, never even gave her a bowl until
well,
my dad passed away because she if she fed her two kibbles, she started getting fat. So however much my dad was giving her was enough.
well. Well, what I have found is that I'm not totally rigid. Like breakfast happens within a 45-minute to an hour and a half time period. And dinner's kind of the same way. There's a 45-minute to maybe hour and a half time period within which we get fed. So, but it's not as fluid perhaps as I would like, but it is what it is. And so,
So
um,
when we think of the evolution of dogs and how that might interrelate with living with families, I think sometimes there's a little bit of, well, I think sometimes there's a lot of it of not letting our dogs be dogs, right? Like
yes,
not letting them sniff and not, I don't know. I have a lot of wanting to let them express their dogness maybe more than I still don't want them peeing in my house, but I like to let them sniff. I like to let them investigate. I like to see the world kind of through their lens. I think that that's pretty fantastic. So even doing the nose work, right? I have a new appreciation for my own dog who is able to find antlers outside that are hidden that I don't notice. Uh, I think everybody should take a nose work class with their dog to learn how to defer to them. Well, I mean, as we've evolved, I think how our dogs live with us has evolved. I imagine that, during, I'm just going to speak from a North American settler kind of perspective. Um, our dogs probably ran a lot more when we had homesteads, right? We weren't necessarily building fences to keep our dogs in. We were building fences to keep wolves out, but and to, protect our children. But having our dogs running around in the woods outside of our property and alerting us when a bear's coming or, when there's a deer, those things are all probably hugely beneficial to keeping ourselves safe. So I think when we weren't packed in quite so tightly as we are now, when we were outside more, our companion animals were also roving and outside and being dogs and being allowed to express that dogness and really being appreciated for it. Cleaning up the scrap pile so that we didn't have the same amount of disease and we weren't drawing other scavengers in was hugely beneficial. Now, God, goodness forbid if a dog gets in the compost heap, right? Everybody flips out, and I'm sure it's spectacularly dangerous. But those are things that I'm guessing in the early settling of the U.S., like that's what our dogs did, was they consumed that stuff.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. The other thing I was thinking about is that I think as we have become a perhaps a lack of a better term, a more leisurely oriented society. We don't have to, I mean, although I was out gathering wood this morning, where I'm not chopping wood and I'm not, I mean, the kind of survival skills that we have today are not as sort of basic as they used to be. And so can't help but wonder if as we've become more leisure oriented in the fact that we're not, you know, chopping wood and we're not making fire and we're not, skinning animals and that we become more sophisticated. If we put a pressure on our dogs to be more like us as well, to be more couch potatoes, and that's what we look for in dogs. But I can't help but wonder too is and so the dogs don't have the same sort of utilitarian purpose in our lives as they used to. I think about the Laura Ingalls Wilder's books and their dog Jack, who was incredibly important to the family because he was their watchdog and their guard dog. And like I remember the one scene where they were crossing the river and the river was higher than they thought, and they didn't put Jack in the wagon. Jack had to swim across the stream, and they thought he got lost. And it was later on at night when they were camping, they saw some eyes, and it turned out it was Jack had gotten out of the river and came down and had joined them. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, I think that I would have put my dog in the wagon. But for them, it was like, we've got to think about, keeping the horses safe and getting the wagon safe and keeping the girls safe. And Jack's just going to have to take care of himself. And I think there was in some ways, a more utilitarian aspect to keeping of our animals. But I
Right.
also,
If you were hunting for a meal every day,
yeah,
then having a gun dog who was springing prey for you was important in a way that wasn't just that one weekend a year with the guys.
yeah, absolutely. So I can't help but think that as our lifestyles have changed, how have we pushed our dogs to change their lifestyles to match ours, rather than trying to continue to to accommodate. And I wonder if there wasn't more of a balance or sort of mutual respect between owner and dog. I think about how much they loved Jack and how important Jack was. Not
Right.
just
It's a different kind of appreciation.
yeah, a very deep appreciation for the many things that he brought to their family. And I wonder if we have that has been lost a little bit, which is why we've sort of lost our tolerance for their dogginess
Agree.
because there's not as much of a
Right. Again,
need.
like think about all the people, and I don't let my dogs do this either, but all the people who will come to us and say, well, he gets in the trash can. I was like, well, for 40,000 years, that's what dogs were paid to do.
Yeah, sorry. He's just connecting with his ancestors, you know?
Right.
So,
He's having a moment. But like they are scavengers. They
mhm.
do want to take care of the chicken that you threw in the trash can. Um, and it will, in some cases, they will off themselves eating inappropriate things, but non-foodstuffs.
Yeah.
But yes, I would say that a lot of the things that frustrate families about their dogs are things that in the past would have been appreciated and necessary for our survival, right?
Yes.
I I
Yes.
want them to eat the waste that is available to consume so that we don't have predators coming into camp to eat carrion.
Right. Right. And also too, the more you can eat of waste material, the more food's available for the humans. I mean, it's also there's that balance. So I think that we have sort of forced changes. And the thing is that genetics, some genetics can change pretty quickly, but there's other stuff you just can't push that hard. And so I think that, our dogs are probably, they're still working on genes that were effective 100 years ago that aren't as effective now. But I was also thinking too that as much as we may have molded the evolution of the dog, I can't help but wonder how much the dog has molded our evolution. How much has our relationship with dogs changed us? And I don't know if there's any way to tell that, but I just think that you know, in Alaska, I remember reading this was a story from like 150 years ago that this guy who was coming into camp with his dog sled and his one of his dogs went lame. And these dogs, I mean, they survived so that his wife got into the traces to replace the dog so that they could ease the dog's burden. And so I'm thinking that's how important dogs were or are, is that we're talking about survival, so we need to take care of the dog, and you can run in the traces for, the last bit. But I can't help but wonder if maybe dogs haven't been beneficial for us in a variety of ways. I mean, how many studies have shown that, petting a dog will lower your blood pressure, right? That
Then mine should be zero.
Yeah, I guess I agree. Or getting out and taking your dog for a walk just to get yourself out and get moving, how much better that is for our health. And, you know, um, what did we learn from dogs about, when do you, that maybe there's something to be said for just enjoying a lay in the sun, that perhaps we can learn something about leisure from our dogs rather than imposing our leisure is that, when it's time to shut down, you shut down, you relax, and then you get ready to go. Because unlike Zuzu right now, she's sleeping by my side, but if I get up and say, hey, let's go for a WALK, she'll be ready to go. So I think dogs can teach us a lot about being in the moment, that the here and the now is where we really need to focus our attention. And so I think dogs have sort of, or have the ability anyway, to radically change us if we allow ourselves to be radically changed.
Well, I think they can make us definitely be better.
Yes. Yes.
Do better, be better, love more.
Yeah, so I think we can say thank you to those ancestors of ours, the Homo erectus or Homo what was the anyway, I don't, my sister would know. She knows all the
She knows
proto.
all the things.
Yeah, the Neanderthals. Thank you very much for taking care of, these animals so many thousands of years ago so that we can have our friends today. Anyway, so that was a bit of an interesting riff on the evolution of dogs. We kind of came full circle here. So,
Well, and
anything
if you have things to add, if you're a dog geneticist who wants to jump in with some some fantastic
we would
tips
love
and
it.
information, we would love to have you on to talk to us about it because
Yes,
we like learning new things.
we do. We do.
So, if you're enjoying the podcast, please like us. Please share us on your socials. Um, please rank us, right? Please share the podcast with other people who you think may appreciate it. We would surely appreciate it. And you
Yes.
can always email us at the yourfamilydogpodcast@gmail.com to give us your information or your perspective on things. Give us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Is there anything
Absolutely.
else we need to have them? Oh, and we are on the Face Space at Your Family Dog Podcast. So you can always like us and share us from there as well.
All right. That sounds great. Thanks, Tina. And
Thank you, Julie.
we will see you all next time on Your Family Dog.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.